Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to answer the question of, can you really take advantage of the so-called Trifecta Strategy? All right, we're going to cover this and see how it applies to you. Is it something that might be useful to you? Is it not something useful to you? What is it that you might not know that could get you into trouble? So we're going to go through that. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, nail the notification bell, make sure you don't miss out on any of our future videos. We try to produce great content for you every single day, so go out and check some of those videos. If you're interested at all in assistance with relocating abroad and structuring yourself abroad personally or for your business, either on the strategy side, what's best for you, or on the implementation side, forming companies, opening bank accounts, etc., please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, or check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com. You can send us a message through there. Okay. So there's this idea of the so-called Trifecta Strategy, and it's named based on this idea. Most countries in the world consider you to be a resident if you live there or are physically present in that country for 183 days, approximately 6 months plus a day, right? And so the idea is, well, hang on a minute, why don't I just be super smart and spend less than 6 months in 3 different countries, dividing my time between the 3, and great. I'm not tax resident anywhere, and that's perfect, right? So there's a few parts to this. First of all, just from a banking standpoint, you typically need to declare residency somewhere, which means you typically need a residency permit somewhere and an actual residence, okay? So it's very, very difficult to be completely nomadic. Now, you can say, okay, perfect, I've got myself a residency permit somewhere. Maybe I do it in UAE, where I am today, or I do it in Panama, where it's easy to maintain, or I get something like that, and I happen to maintain a home in one of these places, so no big deal. I have a utility bill. All right, so that solves your banking issue, right? You don't have to spend 6 months a year in order to deal with the banking. What about tax side of things? So here's the problem. In all likelihood, if where you are living are, let's call it, less developed countries, you can almost certainly get away with this strategy, okay? I'll tell you another little caveat to that in a second, but usually if you're in less developed countries, so for example, if you go and you spend 4 months in Mexico, you spend 4 months in Thailand, you spend 4 months in Georgia, you're probably going to have no issues. These are not countries that are particularly good at or interested in spending a lot of resources on coming after you in that particular situation, okay? They kind of realize that these people, we have enough problems locally that we have to deal with. These people are tourists. They come and they spend in our economy. This is good for us. We don't really want to create bad PR, etc. So that tends to be pretty useful, okay? However, let's say you decide to go and do that in Spain or Germany or France or UK or Australia. Now, you might still get away with it, okay? In fact, I would say, the thing is, what we're talking about now is going to be source income. I've done some videos on this. You can go and check it out, source income and permanent establishments. This is a very difficult thing to pin down in a world of globally mobile entrepreneurs, okay? So in other words, if I'm in a situation where I have a Panamanian residency and I go and I spend 4 months out of the year living in Australia, then the likelihood that Australia is going to pay attention to me and know, hey, listen, we should be going after this guy, is fairly small, okay? Because it's just a really tough thing to tell, what are you doing while you're in our country, okay? The bigger you get, the more this is potentially an issue. You can kind of start to weigh that out. However, for sure, if you have some sort of a tie to that country, then that could start to become an issue. And I think increasingly, as the global tax nets need to be tightened because these countries are desperate for money, we can look at Spain as a good example of this, right? The incentive to go and start looking is going to increase. And increasingly, the ability to look is improving, right? Because things are electronic, you're no longer transacting primarily in cash, etc. They'll start to be able to look at this. So from a legal standpoint, okay, not from what you can get away with, because there's a good chance there's a lot of things you can get away with, right? But just from a purely legal standpoint, are you legally not taxable in that country? Well, that depends, okay? So let's basically, on what basis are you taxed? You're taxed on the basis that you're a resident there. So you're not, if you're saying, okay, well, I'm not a resident, all right, that could be an issue. Now, please note, in a lot of parts of the world, 183 days, as I mentioned before, is not a maximum threshold or a minimum threshold for residency. Meaning, you can be resident in a place without spending 183 days there. This is like a common misconception that people have. In a lot of the world, if you're present less than 183 days, but that is your home, you treat it as your home, then you're a tax resident there. And suddenly that makes you subject to local taxes, okay? That's something that is a potential issue for you. So you may be a tax resident and not know about it, okay? That's the first thing that can bite you. The second way is in terms of your source income, okay? Well, the second way is actually in terms of if you have a company there, but let's say that you don't have a company there. We'll go on to the second way, which is source income, all right? Now, source income takes two forms. The first form is, hey, listen, there's income that's derived there, generally passive income, so rent, capital gains from real property, royalties, interest, dividends, okay? Maybe you don't have that. Maybe you're saying, okay, again, I'm in Panama, I don't have any investments here, it's fine, right? On the flip side, what if you're in a situation where you're looking at your business income, okay? So the way that it works is if you read through tax treaties, there's two different areas you have to pay attention to. First is essentially the work that you have as a so-called dependent agent, okay? So in other words, if you have a foreign company and you work for your company, you are dependent on your company, you're like a primary creator of the value in your company, then you could be a dependent agent of that company, okay? Now, depending on the tax treaty, and let's recognize that in a lot of cases there is no tax treaty, and if you're claiming residency nowhere, tax residency, then you don't have the protection of a tax treaty, so that could work against you doubly, right? Then you may be subject to tax, or your business may be subject to tax on the basis of the work that you're doing in that country, okay? So that's the first thing to watch out for. The second is, very likely, if you're living there for 4 months out of the year and you're transacting, etc., you would constitute a permanent establishment in that country. Now, how much do you do? Where does that line get drawn? That's very country by country. You have to look at tax treaties, etc. But let's say you're maintaining a permanent home. Let's say you have a home office that you operate through. Let's say you're somebody who you're signing contracts and agreements on behalf of the company. Well, is that subject to local tax? In a lot of cases, yes, it would be, okay? So does that mean, hey, listen, this isn't a good strategy, you shouldn't, try and split your time, etc.? This is, I would think, partially a function of just your values, right? If you say, okay, great, I'm gonna spend less than 6 months in 3 different countries or more than 3 countries, right? Okay, you have a place that's empty for part of the year, and do you want to be away from that place? Like, where do you want to be? That's personally up to you, right? From a tax standpoint, it might work. It depends on the countries you're talking about. Will you get away with it? Pretty reasonable likelihood that you will. Especially if you're not dealing with kind of like developed first world countries. If you're dealing in Denmark, well, they're more aggressive. If you're in Netherlands, they're the smartest tax collectors in Europe probably. So some of these places, they're going to have more of a chance of coming after you. But if you're in a situation where you're saying, okay, great, I'm hanging out in, I don't know, like I said, Georgia, then might be a reasonable strategy. So here's what I would generally advise people. I would generally advise people saying, okay, great, be resident and be tax resident if you can in some place that is going to be favorable for you. If you have the opportunity that place is some place that you can take advantage of tax treaties, perfect, like all the better. That's a much better situation for you. If you're in a situation where you can't, where you're like, hey, listen, for whatever reason, you're not going to spend so much time there, or that's a country that doesn't have the tax treaties, etc. All right, be very cautious about the connections that you forge in countries that might get you into trouble. If it doesn't get you into trouble, if it's countries that aren't going to get you into trouble, great. And some of them, that's the case, right? Some cases, it's very clear. You don't have to worry about it. They're only taxing based on XYZ factor. So, go and look at it. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. That gives like a little bit of a context. This is very country by country. That's kind of the thing I want to emphasize to you. I often have people reach out to me and they'll say, hey, listen, I think I need this because somebody I know has this. It's like, well, that person's in a different circumstance than you, so they need something different than you do. So we need to tailor what it is that you want to achieve to what it is that your goals are and your circumstances are, right? So pay attention to that and then work accordingly. For the right people, could be a great strategy. For the wrong people, could really get them into trouble, and it's dangerous to think that, hey, listen, I can automatically be out of the country for less than 183 days and therefore not be tax resident, or worse, even if you're not tax resident, not be subject to tax, because that might not be true. You might be creating a permanent establishment, and that could come and hurt you in the future. So anyway, I hope that helps. If you have questions about it, please put it in the comments below. If you have suggestions for other content, we'd love to hear from it. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends. And if you would like help with this, please, again, feel free to book a call with me at calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.